Tracking leads to freedom.
Exactly.
So tracking leads to freedom. How? What does that even mean? What kind of tracking are we talking about here?
So like when people first get started in, I would say any health fitness journey, whether it's on a meal plan or if it's tracking macros, one of the questions that they typically ask is, am I going to have to do this for the rest of my life? Right. And realistically, eating on a meal plan for the rest of your life, very boring. Right.
Oh gosh.
And then and even like putting food on a scale for the rest of your life can be very restricting. Right. But the reality is that in order to get really good success, you do have to develop it as a base skill. And that skill will allow you to be able to have so much more freedom on the back end. Right.
And so, like in the beginning, when you are starting out on your journey, I mean, we're all measuring and tracking in some way, whether we realize it or not. And what we mean by this is we're using our eyeballs. We're like, you go maybe to a buffet or you go to a friend's house and you scoop like one scoop, you're measuring. Or maybe you're like, oh, okay, like that looks like a good serving size. So you are measuring, you just don't realize that you're actually measuring or associate measuring in that way. And when you're starting out, the beauty of tracking that goes along with measuring is you really get to learn what's in your foods and what you are feeling your body, how many calories, what the heck, like, is there protein? Is there fats? Is there carbs? Like, what's in what it is that I'm eating?
And it allows you to be able to know with certainty what you enjoy and how your body responds to things that you enjoy versus like there's so much nonsense out there and everyone always wonders like what's the perfect food for me or what's the best diet for this or like I'm this body type, so what should my macro ratios be? Whereas like this is exactly what helps you figure that out, right?
And so when you start out on your journey, like we said, you're measuring and tracking in some way. And so when it comes down to tracking, sometimes you just start logging foods, honestly. Like just get into that habit because doing that will be such an eye-opening experience. So learning like how to utilize your nutrition tracker, whatever one that you decide to use, and then start logging your foods. And you're like, huh, I got this. Like I log all the foods, into my little tracker thing. Now, then you can start to increase the way that you measure and track. And so whether that's like, okay, like I got a serving of potatoes. And then when you get to get comfortable, you can start using measuring cups. And then you can increase the accuracy by starting to weigh your foods, because I will tell you right now, there is a massive difference between measuring cups and food weight. Because let's be real. Peanut butter. What is a tablespoon of peanut butter? Is it a heaping tablespoon?
It's not enough.
It's not enough. It's not enough. Side trick. You can melt it in the microwave and then it goes a lot longer.
There you go.
Yes. But anyways, so when you're doing it, you're tracking your foods, you start to increase your measuring or precision in the way that you measure. And then as you're doing that, I can't recommend enough, like I recommend enough, that you look and see visually how much that actually is. Because there's going to be plenty of scenarios that you're going to encounter in your life where you either A, don't want to bring a scale to wherever it is that you're going, or maybe you don't even have access to a scale. And so by learning to associate the whatever it is on the scale with your eyeballs, you're conditioning yourself, kind of like when you just first started, you're like, oh, like that's a serving of potatoes. But now you actually have that background knowledge of this is what a serving of potatoes is, or I know about how much this is, so that eventually you get to the point where you don't need the scale anymore.
Yeah. And so it gives you the ability to, at one point, be able to eyeball or know or look at it and be like, oh, cool, this is like me, my background is, construction. So it's like, oh, in the very beginning, it's like measure everything with a measuring tape, right? And then after a while, it's like, oh, it's about, this long. And you could get pretty close at guessing about what you're dealing with, right? And food is no different. Or if you don't have a background in building, like one of the things that's probably close is, gas in the car. You first start driving, you have no idea how much a quarter tank will get you, right? And then after a while, it's like, oh, cool. This much gas will get me this far. I know. And if
or lasts me X amount of days.
Yeah. And whereas like, and depending on how, crazy you want to be with measurements, you may be someone that's like, oh, you track, it gets me this many miles, or you say, hey, it can get me to work and back for the entire week. right? But
But
that
you-
comes from developing the skill.
Yeah, and you have to build that association for yourself because we all have different ways in which we relate and can understand. And the way that this man's brain thinks is completely different than the way my brain thinks.
It's backwards.
It is backwards. He's special. We love him. That's why he's so smart. But anyways, the whole purpose of measuring and tracking is to be able to, it's a tool. It's a tool and a skill that takes time to develop, that takes time to learn, but will really increase and enhance your knowledge base so that you can have the freedom to choose and eat the foods that you want in the amounts and the ways that you want.
Yeah.
And that is the whole purpose of it, honestly.
Yeah.
That's where the freedom comes from.
One, I'd say, to use another example, would be like when you're growing up and you're learning math in school, and it's like, I'm never going to use this for the rest of my life, right? But like the stronger your foundational math skills are, so just even simple, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, the easier it is to look at something and go, oh, cool, right? Like you can know how much something costs and how much change you're going to get based on whatever without having to actually calculate. You just know. Right. And so but you had years of developing that as a foundation skill for yourself. So later on, you could know without any effort exactly what you're going to get. Right. And the same thing happens here. It was like it does take some time to develop that as a skill, but then you'll be able to go anywhere in life and go like, oh, cool, this is that, this is this, and be able to stay on track, make progress, be in control of the way that you look and feel without always having to put something on the scale. And just like with math, if every once in a while you're not too sure, you can pull out a calculator and you can double check your work, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, cool. Maybe I'm a little bit off on here. Let me get back to putting stuff on a scale and redevelop my skill because I haven't necessarily done it in this regard. So
I can relate on that for sure because we've gotten to the point, especially like when we're traveling all the time. If I'm not in the kitchen and measuring and stuff, it's something that gets deconditioned because I haven't done it in a while. And so it's just like, oh, let's get back in the habit.
And then if you're going out to eat, it's one of those things where it's like, restaurants will always have different sizes of, chicken or fish or steak or like whatever. And so like when you're at the house and you're cooking it, you weigh it out in the beginning. It's, oh, cool. This is 6 to 8 ounces. And you go to restaurants, oh, that's close. And then maybe somewhere a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger. So then you think of, a 10-ounce one is a 6-ounce one because like over time, it's been close enough, and then the margin has grown. And so every once in a while, you do have to kind of recalibrate your eye to be like, oh, cool, this is exactly what it looks like, depending on your surroundings, what's going on, all of that stuff. But it is one of those things that like
our eyeballs are bigger than our stomachs sometimes, especially in the beginning, right?
And taking the time in the beginning to learn this as a skill is what's going to give you so much more freedom on the back end. So it's not something that like you're going to have to bust the scale out for the rest of your life. But if you invest the time in the beginning, it will lead to so much more freedom. I know ourselves as an example, people look at us like, oh, how do you guys eat what you eat or do what you do or go out or do all this and maintain? It's because we've taken the time and the energy and the effort to develop that as a foundational skill for ourselves. And whenever we feel like we're getting too far off the mark, then we go back, strengthen that foundation and continue to build on top of it.
And when we say like getting too off the mark, like a lot of like what we're referring to is like, oh, hey, like if we aren't progressing, whether that's, like physically within our bodies or whatever, then it's like, okay, well, how accurate have I been with the way that I've been measuring and tracking? It's like, well, I haven't really been using the scale. Okay, well, what a great tool that you used in the beginning to get the results that you got to go back to once again recondition those eyeballs. So that's the beauty of it. Yeah.
So take the time. Like I said, everyone wants freedom, but you have to be willing to acknowledge that freedom comes on the back end of discipline. So in the beginning, it will take a little bit of discipline. If you put in the time to develop that discipline in the beginning, then you'll have so much freedom on the back end. You'll be able to move around in a way that has everyone in your life wondering like, how is it that you're able to do this and X, Y, Z, right? But that's because you've put in the work and developed a skill that most people have never and will never develop.
And last little point, when I think about like this, like, I guess we can say like when we're like little and you're walking, how long did it take you to learn how to walk? You had to do it over and over and over again. Same thing when you learned whatever subject, math, you had to do it over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. But you use math all the time, right? Maybe you use your fingers now and your calculator. I don't know. Both are great.
And you use it all the time without thinking, and you get better and better. And you think about new ways to make it difficult, right? Like for walking, then you start running, or when you're a little kid. Like, you know, our nephew was over a couple weeks ago, and he was excited to be able to walk backwards on the treadmill. Right, it's like it's a different skill, right? Forwards, backwards, like all that stuff. So you just get better. You develop those things as you want more and more out of life, and this is no different.
It becomes a part of who you are.
And so that's where like the fun happens, because then like everyone uses the term like, oh, lifestyle, and it's kind of like a buzzed phrase, but the reality is that like when you develop the skill, it's not necessarily just a lifestyle, it just becomes a part of who you are, right? Like, doesn't matter how busy you get, how stressed you get, like if it's a part of who you are, then it'll always be fine. So like, it doesn't matter what life throws at you, you'll be in good health because this is just a part of who you are. Just like the skill or the habit of brushing your teeth. It doesn't really matter, or simple hygiene, right? It doesn't really matter how stressed life is or how busy you get. You're not going to completely throw that out the window. And so it's like, well, hopefully, right? Everyone, who knows?
Maybe there's a night where you're like, oh, it's really late. I had too many drinks. I'm just going to go pass out.
But it's one of those things where it's like, cool, because it's just a part of who you are. And no one refers to brushing your teeth like, oh, it's a lifestyle. Actually, brushing your teeth. It's just like it's just second nature to them. And like when you take the time to develop this skill, it becomes second nature to you.